Shock hook on live television. The unthinkable happened. A political veteran screamed at her opponent, and yet, she never saw the counterpunch coming. The cameras caught every syllable, every tightened jaw, every ounce of venom as Kellyanne Conway's voice rose above the studio lights. She leaned forward, finger jabbing the air like a weapon, her words tumbling out with the force of someone desperate to dominate the stage. For a moment, it wasn't a debate, it was a spectacle, a storm of rage broadcast into living rooms across America. The audience could feel it through their screens, the tension, the heat, the sheer imbalance of power. Conway was not just talking, she was shouting, her cadence sharp, designed to cut. It was the move of a seasoned political brawler, someone who had learned that volume could substitute for truth. And yet, across the table, Jasmine Crockett sat still. Not frozen, not intimidated. Still, her expression was calm, almost serene, as if Conway's storm was nothing more than background noise. Crockett's eyes held steady, her hands rested in front of her, unshaken by the verbal barrage. It was the kind of composure that felt alien in the world of cable news crossfire, where shouting usually wins the night. But Jasmine wasn't there to shout. She was there to show something different. The contrast was cinematic. Conway, red-faced and relentless, playing the role of the aggressor. Crockett, dignified, breathing slowly, allowing silence to speak louder than rage. Viewers at home leaned closer to their screens, sensing something unusual unfolding. This wasn't the typical back-and-forth circus they'd grown numb to. This was a collision of two political archetypes, chaos versus calm, bluster versus backbone. And then, in that silence between Conway's bursts of fury, a new kind of suspense filled the air. It was the question everyone was asking, but no one could answer yet. How would Jasmine respond? Would she finally raise her voice to meet fire with fire, or would she dismantle the outburst in a way Conway never expected? Raise the stakes. The clash between Kellyanne Conway and Jasmine Crockett wasn't just another tense moment on television. It was a mirror reflecting back the cultural divides that define America today. On one side stood Conway, a seasoned political warrior who had built her career on sharp elbows and sharper words. She was the strategist who once thrived in the chaos of spin rooms, the architect of soundbites that cut deep, the veteran who knew how to turn outrage into oxygen. Conway's reputation preceded her. Audiences expected her to dominate, to bulldoze, to never back down. That was her brand. On the other side sat Jasmine Crockett, newer to the national spotlight, but already carving a reputation of her own. She carried herself with the poise of a trial lawyer, her questions sharp, her words deliberate, her tone steady. She was not there to outshout anyone. She was there to outthink them. Crockett's rise had been marked not by spectacle but by substance, by a calm intensity that cut through noise. To her supporters, she embodied the future. Unapologetically black, unapologetically a woman, unapologetically unshaken in spaces designed to rattle voices like hers. That was why this moment mattered so much. It wasn't simply a clash of personalities. It was a collision of two Americas. Conway represented the old guard of political theater, loud, combative, forceful, steeped in a style that mistook volume for power. Crockett symbolized something new, a generation demanding that dignity and intellect, not decibels, determine who wins the argument. For viewers, the contrast was electric. Millions tuned in expecting the usual circus, a shouting match that would generate a few clips, a few memes, then fade into the background of political noise. But as the minutes passed, it became clear that this wasn't following the usual script. Conway's voice filled the air, but it wasn't landing the way it used to. Instead, it began to feel hollow, like the echo of a playbook that had lost its grip. Meanwhile, Crockett's silence was beginning to speak louder than any word Conway hurled. Each second of composure elevated her stature. Each calm glance made the audience lean in further. Something rare was happening on live television. Power was shifting. Not through a scream, not through an insult, but through restraint. That shift carried weight far beyond the studio. For immigrant families, for marginalized voices, for anyone who had ever been told to sit down or stay quiet in the face of arrogance, Crockett's calm was more than demeanor. It was defiance. She wasn't rattled. She wasn't reduced. She was rising, and in her rise, millions watching felt themselves rise too. Antagonist backstory. Kellyanne Conway. To understand why Kellyanne Conway's outburst mattered, you have to understand who Kellyanne Conway is. For years, she has been one of America's most recognizable political operatives, not because she wielded quiet influence in back rooms, but because she thrived in the spotlight of chaos. She was the strategist who knew how to bend language until it broke, who could spin a defeat into a victory, who could face down reporters with a smile that often masked disdain. In many ways, Conway made herself indispensable to power by weaponizing confrontation. Her legacy is defined by combative television appearances where she never flinched, never apologized, and never admitted defeat. Ask her a question, and she'd give you an answer that had nothing to do with it, yet delivered with such confidence that casual viewers sometimes believed it. Press her on inconsistencies, and she would pivot so fast it felt like watching political gymnastics. That style wasn't just improvisation, it was her craft. She understood that in a media environment where sound bites matter more than substance, volume could drown out truth. Conway became infamous for coining phrases that would stick, even when they insulted the intelligence of the public. Alternative facts wasn't just a phrase, it was a philosophy, a declaration that reality could be bent to fit the agenda of the moment. Critics saw it as arrogance, a blatant dismissal of dignity and honesty. But to Conway, it was strategy. And for years, that strategy worked. Her approach turned her into both a loyal soldier and a lightning rod. She thrived in confrontation because confrontation was her oxygen. The more adversarial the setting, the sharper she became. When others grew flustered, Conway seemed to grow stronger. She relished interrupting, cutting off opponents mid-sentence, flooding the airwaves with half-truths and distractions until the audience could no longer follow the thread. She wasn't debating. She was overwhelming. And yet, beneath the polish of her media training, there was always an undercurrent of contempt. Contempt for journalists who dared push back. Contempt for opponents who stood their ground. Contempt, at times, even for the audience, as if the spectacle was more important than the truth being discussed. She embodied the archetype of a villain who doesn't believe she's a villain at all, but rather a misunderstood genius who can outsmart the world. Her contradictions only deepened that image. She would rail against the erosion of traditional values while participating in the very machinery that eroded them. She would frame herself as a defender of women even as she diminished the voices of women who challenged her. She built her persona on the idea that she was bold enough to say what others wouldn't, when in reality, she was bold enough to say what wasn't true and expect to get away with it. That is why viewers tuned into her live TV clashes with a mix of fascination and exhaustion. They knew she would deliver fireworks, but they also knew the substance beneath those fireworks was flimsy. Conway's strength wasn't in the weight of her arguments. It was in her ability to dominate the stage long enough that no one noticed the weakness. This made her dangerous in settings where her opponents played by traditional rules. In the past, many fell into her trap. They tried to shout back, only to be drowned out. They tried to argue logically, only to be interrupted before finishing their thought. They tried to remain polite, only to be steamrolled by the sheer force of her will. Conway had perfected a style of political combat that left dignity as collateral damage. But every strategy has its limit. Every weapon, no matter how sharp, dulls when used too often. And Conway, though still confident, had begun to resemble a performer repeating the same act to a crowd that already knew the punchline. Her confrontations were predictable. Her shouting, her interruptions, her disdain, all part of a script that once shocked but now felt tired. That was the stage she carried into this live television moment. She brought the same arsenal she had used for years, certain that her opponent would play the familiar game. She raised her voice, cut across her rival's words, and sharpened her delivery to slice through the studio air. For Conway, it was just another night, another debate, another chance to dominate. But across from her sat Jasmine Crockett, who wasn't playing along. Crockett's composure was a new variable, one Conway hadn't prepared for. Her opponent wasn't flustered. She wasn't rattled. She wasn't even tempted to raise her voice. And without that chaos to feed on, Conway's fury began to look less like strength and more like desperation. Protagonist backstory. Jasmine Crockett. To understand why Jasmine Crockett's composure shook the room, you have to look back at where she came from. Hers is not the story of a political insider groomed in marble hallways and legacy institutions. Hers is the story of grit, resilience, and a relentless pursuit of justice that forged a voice powerful enough to command silence without ever needing to shout. Jasmine Crockett began her professional life not in the limelight of national television, but in the trenches of the courtroom. A trained lawyer, she built her reputation as someone unafraid to take on the hard fights. She represented clients whose names were not known, whose lives were not celebrated, whose stories might otherwise have been ignored. Civil rights, criminal justice reform, the struggles of ordinary people caught in extraordinary systems. These were the battles that shaped her. Each case added steel to her spine. Each courtroom confrontation taught her that power isn't always about who talks the loudest, but about who brings clarity when the noise becomes deafening. She faced judges who doubted her, opponents who underestimated her, and systems designed to wear her down. Yet she did not break. If anything, she grew sharper, more deliberate, more certain of her purpose. Her advocacy eventually carried her into the world of politics, where she brought the same unflinching determination. In Congress, she carved out a reputation as a fierce defender of justice and equality. She spoke with precision, never wasting words, always tethering her arguments to values bigger than herself. While others performed for cameras, Crockett grounded her work in lived experience. She knew that every policy debate wasn't abstract. It was about people whose lives hung in the balance. And through it all, she carried herself with a calm that wasn't weakness but weaponry. It was the calm of someone who had already weathered storms far greater than a television shoutdown. The calm of someone who knew what it meant to be dismissed, underestimated, told to wait her turn. The calm of someone who had learned that dignity, once chosen, cannot be taken away by arrogance. That composure became her signature. While some politicians thrive on theatrics, Crockett thrived on restraint. She was deliberate where others were reckless, thoughtful where others were impulsive. It wasn't that she lacked fire, she had plenty. But she understood the power of timing, the discipline of holding back until the exact moment when words could land with maximum force. Her personal journey made that discipline possible. She knew what it meant to struggle, to fight uphill battles, not just professionally, but personally. She knew the exhaustion of systems that grind people down. And she knew the temptation to lash out, to meet disrespect with the same. But she also knew the strength it took to choose differently, to hold the line with composure, to let silence carry weight. That knowledge didn't come from privilege. It came from survival. By the time she entered the national stage, Jasmine Crockett embodied something that felt both refreshing and formidable. She represented a generation unwilling to shrink in the face of hostility, yet unwilling to lose dignity in the pursuit of victory. Her very presence challenged the notion that power had to be loud to be effective. And so, when Kellyanne Conway erupted on live television, hurling volume like a weapon, Jasmine Crockett did not flinch. She had been here before, not in this studio, not with these cameras, but in 1,000 other moments where the stakes felt just as high. She had faced louder voices. She had stood across from greater odds. And she had learned that the truest form of power isn't always what you say, but how you choose to say it. Her silence that night wasn't hesitation. It wasn't fear. It was discipline. It was experience. It was a decision forged by years of learning when to strike and when to wait. And as Conway's words spilled out like thunder, Crockett's stillness became lightning waiting to strike. Millions of viewers didn't just see a politician sitting calmly. They saw a woman who had spent her life preparing for exactly this kind of moment. A woman who carried with her the weight of every courtroom battle, every injustice confronted, every slight endured. A woman who had turned all of that into strength so refined, it could silence arrogance with nothing more than composure. Debate escalation. The studio lights glared hot, but the real heat was radiating from Kellyanne Conway. Her voice climbed higher, sharper, slicing across the moderator's attempts to keep order. Every time Jasmine Crockett opened her mouth, Conway's interruption thundered in first. Scoffs punctuated the air like drum beats. Her laughter pitched not with humor, but with derision. To Conway, dominance meant drowning out the room, and she played the part with ruthless familiarity. "Let me finish," Crockett began, but Conway pounced, voice cracking like a whip. No, you don't get to filibuster here. You don't even understand the basic facts." The words dripped with disdain, the kind of dismissal Conway had perfected over decades in front of cameras. But this time, her jabs hit something unusual. Nothing. Jasmine did not flinch, did not scramble to interrupt back, did not even lift her voice in protest. She sat upright, gaze steady, lips pressed in a faint, unbothered line. It was composure so absolute that it began to unnerve the room. Behind the cameras, producers shifted nervously in their seats. This was supposed to be television's favorite kind of chaos, two figures talking over one another until the segment ran out of time. But Crockett's silence was breaking the pattern. Instead of noise canceling noise, there was noise colliding with stillness, and the stillness was winning. The studio audience, a mix of staff, press, and guests, leaned forward. Their eyes widened as the imbalance grew. Conway's voice, once commanding, now sounded almost desperate against Crockett's refusal to engage. Every insult Conway lobbed seemed to hang in the air too long, landing without the satisfying rebound of a countershout. Crockett gave nothing but stillness. A tilt of the head here, a calm blink there. The audience began to read volumes into that silence. A refusal to dignify the circus, a confidence that needed no defense. Tension thickened. The air itself felt suspended, as though the cameras had trapped the moment in slow motion. Conway's attacks piled higher, mocking, sneering, gesturing wildly. Yet the power in the room was slipping from her grip. For the first time in her long career, she wasn't dictating the tempo. She was exhausting herself against an opponent who hadn't yet lifted a finger, and the longer Crockett stayed quiet, the more unbearable the anticipation became. Viewers at home could feel it too, their hands frozen above their phones, waiting for the moment they knew was coming. Millions of people held their breath, sensing that silence wasn't the absence of a reply, it was the preparation for one. Finally, Jasmine shifted. Just slightly. She leaned forward, eyes locking on Conway with a precision that pierced straight through the noise. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it jolted the air like a spark before a storm. The mic drop counterattacked. The studio was trembling with Conway's fury. Her words kept spilling out like a flood no one had asked for, a barrage of half-truths and sharpened jabs designed to overwhelm. The strategy was textbook Conway. If you can't win with facts, bury the stage in noise until no one can tell the difference. But what Kellyanne didn't realize, what no one in the studio yet understood, was that Jasmine Crockett was quietly setting the trap. She had let Conway burn herself out, allowed the chaos to reach its peak. Every scoff, every sneer, every dismissive wave of Conway's hand only stacked the suspense higher. Viewers at home shifted in their seats, muttering at their screens. "Say something, Jasmine. Clap back. Don't let her steamroll you." But Crockett, steady as stone, knew exactly what she was doing. And then, silence. A silence not from Conway, who was still roaring, but from the way Crockett finally lifted her chin and drew the studio's gaze back to her. In that single movement, the storm seemed to pause. The interruptions didn't stop, but suddenly they sounded shrill, even panicked. Crockett hadn't yet spoken, but the shift in power was unmistakable. "Are you finished?" Jasmine asked, her voice calm but edged with steel. No yelling, no raised pitch, just a question, deliberate and slow, slicing through Conway's flood of words like a scalpel. For a second, the audience thought Conway might charge forward, might barrel past the interruption and reclaim her dominance. But the precision of that line, short, sharp, unbothered, landed like a body blow. Conway froze, mouth open mid-sentence. Jasmine leaned in. Her voice didn't rise, but it expanded, filling the space Conway had drowned in moments before. "You've spent years on television shouting people down, spinning stories that collapse under the slightest weight of truth. But here's the difference between you and me. I don't need to raise my voice to be heard. I don't need to invent a reality to win an argument. I have the facts. I have the record. And I have the dignity you lost a long time ago." The studio erupted. Gasps, murmurs, a ripple of stunned energy spread across the room. The producers, who had been motioning frantically moments earlier, now froze in awe. This wasn't the usual back-and-forth shouting match cable news thrived on. This was a surgical dismantling, and Conway was the patient on the table. Conway's eyes darted. She tried to form words, but Crockett wasn't done. Her tone sharpened, Not with anger, but with precision, like a lawyer building her case. You can yell all you want, Kellyanne. You can call people names, talk over them, try to drown them out. But that doesn't change the truth. The truth is you've made a career out of gaslighting this country, out of telling people that lies are facts and chaos is order. That may have worked when nobody dared to stand still in front of you. But today? Not here. Not with me. The audience gasped again. Even viewers at home, watching through screens, felt the electricity. Twitter timelines ignited instantly. Jasmine Crockett just ended Kellyanne Conway live on air. This is a masterclass in composure. She didn't just clap back, she obliterated her. Watching Conway crumble in real time is better than Netflix. Inside the studio, the moderator blinked, clearly stunned but unwilling to intervene. For the first time all night, Conway looked smaller. She shifted in her seat, tugging at her blazer, scrambling for the next talking point. But the more she fumbled, the more the contrast burned, because Crockett wasn't just speaking, she was embodying something larger. She didn't need to match Conway's volume. She didn't need to claw for attention. By simply refusing to descend into the pit, she made Conway look like she had been shouting into a void. Crockett continued, her words slow, deliberate, unshakable. I'm here because my constituents sent me. I'm here because real families are struggling, and they want leaders who can solve problems, not personalities who can scream the loudest on TV. You think volume equals power, Kellyanne. But power is knowing when not to raise your voice, when your presence is enough to expose the emptiness of your opponents. That was the moment jaws dropped. Some in the audience actually clapped, unable to contain themselves. The producers waved frantically to keep order, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. Conway tried to cut in, her voice cracking slightly. Well, no, listen, that's not. But the confidence was gone. The timing was off. She sputtered like a fighter swinging after the bell had rung. Every word she managed to force out only deepened the impression that she had already lost, and Crockett, calm as ever, simply leaned back, letting silence punctuate her victory. That silence roared louder than Conway's tirade. It wasn't emptiness, it was triumph. Viewers across America knew they had just witnessed something rare, a dismantling not with insults, not with rage, but with dignity. In a political era defined by shouting matches and endless spin, Jasmine Crockett had delivered something almost revolutionary, a counterattack built on composure, clarity, and moral weight. Within minutes, clips began to flood social media. The hashtags trended instantly. Hashtag Crockett clapback, hashtag Kellyanne exposed, hashtag silence is power. Late-night hosts were already sharpening their monologues. Journalists rushed to describe the moment in glowing detail. And millions of everyday Americans shared the video, not because they loved politics, but because they loved seeing arrogance collapse under truth. For Conway, the irony was cruel. She had entered the debate confident that volume would carry her. Instead, her own noise became the rope she hung herself with. The aftermath shockwaves, the studio lights dimmed, but the battle was far from over. Within seconds of Jasmine Crockett's final words, the internet did what it does best. It erupted. Clips of the exchange flooded timelines like a tidal wave, each one more explosive than the last. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. No platform was safe from the wildfire. The hashtags wrote themselves. Hashtag Crockett clapback trended within minutes, followed closely by hashtag Kellyanne exposed and hashtag silence is power. On TikTok, users layered Crockett's line, "I don't need to raise my voice to be heard," over dramatic music, turning it into an anthem. Memes sprouted instantly, side-by-sides of Conway's red-faced shouting next to Crockett's calm, piercing stare, GIFs looping the exact second Conway froze in stunned silence. Mashups where Crockett's words played over scenes from courtroom dramas and anime battles. Twitter, or X, as some stubbornly called it, became a digital battleground. Pundits, journalists, and everyday users chimed in. One viral tweet read, "Kellyanne Conway brought a megaphone. Jasmine Crockett brought a sword. Guess who walked away standing?" Another joked, "Somebody check on Conway. She just got out-debated by pure composure." Celebrities, too, joined the chorus. An A-list actress posted Crockett's line with the caption, "This belongs on a t-shirt." A Grammy-winning rapper tweeted, "This the energy we need in politics. Calm, sharp, unshakable." Overnight, Crockett's moment wasn't just political, it was pop culture. Meanwhile, Conway became the internet's newest punchline. Her screeching, once her weapon, was now meme fodder. Edits spliced her shouting into comedy skits, while TikTokers lip-synced her lines with exaggerated facial expressions, turning her meltdown into viral parody. Even late-night comedians couldn't resist. By the next evening, every monologue had a Conway impression, followed by Crockett's mic drop replayed to thunderous applause. Cable news, sensing ratings gold, replayed the clash on endless loop. Morning shows debated the Crockett effect. Analysts framed it as more than a debate, a symbolic clash of styles, of noise versus dignity. One network even ran a cheer-in that read, "Did calm just beat chaos?" YouTube creators pounced. Reaction channels uploaded breakdowns with titles like "Kellyanne destroyed by Jasmine Crockett. Watch this." Political commentators paused the clip frame by frame, highlighting Crockett's body language, the slow turn of the head, the pause before speaking, the silence that swallowed Conway whole. This, one host explained, is Power Dynamics 101. Crockett didn't just win the argument. She rewrote the rules. And on TikTok, the edits only grew bolder. One creator paired Crockett's words with a slow-motion zoom and orchestral music, calling it the greatest debate moment of the year. Another stitched the clip into a motivational video. When life gets loud, remember Jasmine Crockett. Silence is strength. The contrast was inescapable. Conway had shouted until her voice cracked. Crockett had spoken softly, and somehow her words thundered louder than any scream. But the shockwaves weren't confined to screens. In coffee shops and office break rooms, people replayed the clip, debating its meaning. For younger viewers, many disillusioned with politics, Crockett suddenly represented something rare, composure without compromise. Teachers showed the clip in classrooms as an example of debate strategy. Parents shared it with their kids, proud to showcase a leader who embodied dignity under pressure. Conway, for all her years of commanding television, had finally met an opponent who understood how the medium itself had changed. In the viral era, volume doesn't always dominate. Presence does. Precision does. And Crockett, in a single exchange, had mastered both. The shockwaves rolled outward. Politicians weighed in, some praising Crockett's restraint, others warning that viral fame is fleeting. But the consensus was undeniable. A cultural moment had just been born. And while Conway scrambled to regain her footing, Crockett's name was now cemented in headlines, hashtags, and history. Resolution in the days that followed, pundits tried to frame the clash as a political skirmish, but Jasmine Crockett refused to let it be reduced to just another headline. When asked about Conway's outburst, Crockett didn't mock, didn't gloat. Instead, she reframed the entire moment into something bigger, something that resonated far beyond party lines. Her message was simple: calm is greater than chaos, dignity greater than arrogance. She told a reporter, "When people yell at you, it's usually because they've run out of ideas. I don't believe leadership is about who can shout the loudest. It's about who can stand the tallest when the shouting starts." That line spread almost as fast as the viral clip itself. Because it wasn't just a jab at Kellyanne Conway. It was a universal truth, one people felt in their bones. Everyone who had ever been dismissed, shouted down, or underestimated recognized themselves in that moment. Crockett's calm wasn't just a political strategy. It was a lesson in power, and the lesson struck a chord because, for years, America had been told that rage was strength. The loudest voices had dominated the stage, drowning out nuance, dignity, and empathy. But Crockett turned that logic on its head. She showed that grace, when wielded with precision, could cut deeper than any scream. The inspirational crescendo grew as her words spread. Teachers quoted her in classrooms. Ministers echoed her in Sunday sermons. Motivational speakers wove her line into lectures about resilience. What had begun as a tense TV exchange had blossomed into a cultural parable, the reminder that real strength doesn't need to prove itself with volume. For progressive audiences, the symbolism was irresistible. Here was a Black woman, an immigrant-friendly advocate, a fighter for civil rights, standing her ground without ever raising her voice. And in doing so, silencing one of the most combative political strategists of the modern era. Representation mattered, but representation with dignity? That felt revolutionary. And yet, Crockett insisted it wasn't about her. This wasn't about me versus Kellyanne, she explained. It was about what we value as a society. Do we reward those who scream? Or do we finally start listening to those who speak with substance? The moral cut deeper than politics. People carried it into their daily lives. Workers replayed the clip before difficult meetings. Students leaned on it when confronting bullies. Parents pointed to it as proof that calmness is not weakness, but power. Crockett had alchemized an attack into a teaching moment. Rage is weakness because it burns itself out. Grace is power because it endures. In that contrast lay the heart of the story. Conway, addicted to chaos, mistook noise for control. Crockett, forged in struggle and resilience, knew better. She carried her dignity like a weapon, and when the moment came, she wielded silence as a shield and words as a sword. That was the resolution millions embraced. The belief that composure is not just survival, but victory. That in an age of screaming matches, the calm voice can still command the room. That when arrogance tries to dominate, dignity has the final word. And so the moral crystallized, replayed in countless retellings. The true way to win, in politics and in life, is not to outshout your opponent, but to outlast them with grace. Kellyanne Conway may have walked into that studio armed with years of experience and a reputation for combat. But Jasmine Crockett walked out with something far greater, proof that dignity, even in the heat of battle, is the ultimate form of power. And with that, the viral moment transformed into something timeless. Not a clash of personalities, not even just a political showdown, but a lesson whispered into the culture itself. When others scream, you don't have to. Because the calmest voice, when it speaks truth, always echoes the loudest. Outro. Kellyanne screamed. Jasmine replied with calm. And calm went viral. That's the headline. But the meaning runs deeper. This wasn't just a clash on cable news. It was a mirror held up to America, a country torn between the temptation of noise and the quiet strength of truth. Conway's outburst was loud, yes, but Crockett's reply proved that volume does not equal victory. In the end, it was dignity that cut through the chaos, and that is the real takeaway. Truth beats volume every single time. Think about it. The clip didn't trend because someone yelled the loudest. It trended because someone stood the tallest. Crockett's calm carried more weight than any scream, and that's why millions felt moved, validated, inspired. For all of us, the lesson is clear. When arrogance tries to overpower, let dignity outshine. When others resort to rage, let grace be your weapon. Because the world doesn't remember the scream, it remembers the strength of the calm reply. And that's why we tell these stories. Not to glorify the noise, but to amplify the quiet power that can truly shift culture. If you believe moments like this matter, if you believe calm is stronger than chaos, if you believe dignity still deserves a platform, then be part of this movement. Share this story. Subscribe. Add your voice to a community that refuses to let truth be drowned out. Because when we stand together, when we elevate those who fight with grace, we send a message louder than any scream. Dignity wins. And that's the story that deserves to go viral.